Hey, Al.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining for the 2017 Resume webinar for Outbound Underground Business Conference. I think right now we have about 25 people watching, so I'm really excited to showcase this webinar. Let's get our resumes up and going, and excited for the conference to come in October. So my name is Rishi Mittal. I'm the conference director for 2017, and I have three of my colleagues on the phone to lead this webinar. So I'll pitch it over to Brian to start off first, to give an intro on his background and just a little bit of information about him. So Brian?
Great, thanks Rishi. Yep, I'll be leading the webinar today. I attended the conference twice in 2013 and 2014 and found it extremely invaluable, and just happy to be back participating as an alum and to work with students again.
Great, thanks Brian. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Dawn and I'm an admissions director for the business conference this year with Terry. I went to the University of Pennsylvania for undergrad and I attended the conference in 2013 and 2014. I'm currently really excited to be involved this year, and I'm employed at the Boston Consulting Group, in part because of the conference.
Thank you, Dawn. Terry, can you introduce yourself?
Yep. Hey, everyone. My name is Terry. I currently work at Barclays. I graduated from NYU, and I've been to O4U for the past 4 years.
Great, thanks, Terry. Your audio might have cut out, but I think you said you're involved in the conference for the past 4 years. So excited to have Terry. Dawn and Terry should have been emailing you all, and you're going to be familiar with their names. And Brian, I believe, I don't think you mentioned, works at Visa as well, and has been involved in the conference for the past 2 years, is now helping our admissions team. A little bit about me. My name is Rishi Mittal. I'm a conference director. I've been involved with the conference planning team for the past 3 years, and then I attended my senior year in 2013. Currently work at Deloitte Consulting as a third-year consultant. And I'm really, really excited to meet you all eventually coming in October. It's going to be an amazing conference. We have some really innovative sessions planned, and I'm excited for everything. So why don't we kick things off by giving a quick overview about the conference and about O4U in general. And then I'm going to kick it over to Brian, who will then lead us through the resume webinar. And before we continue on, if you do have any questions live, there is a live chat window on the YouTube live page. Feel free to type your questions in there. We will collect them and answer them at the end of the webinar. So about O4U Business. So if you may or may not know, but O4U Business is actually part of a greater nonprofit organization called O4U, or Out for Undergrad. And our mission is, at O4U, the work that we do changes lives. Our mission is to help high-achieving LGBTQ undergrads reach their full potential. And this year, we plan on serving at least 700 students. And we accomplish that mission primarily through our 4 conferences. We have a business conference, engineering conference, tech conference, and marketing conference. So right now we are representing the business conference, and we'll have 300 of you high-achieving undergrads become future business leaders of tomorrow, and we're excited to engage with you. So that's a little bit about the O4U mission, how we accomplish our mission, and we're specifically tailored to the business conference here. So why don't we get right away to the resume workshop. Brian, take it away.
Great, thanks Rishi. And first of all, for everyone on the phone, I'd just like to say, congratulations on your acceptance into the conference. That's no small feat. You're a part of a very, very talented group of students who will be attending this year. And as Rishi said, as a group of high-achieving LGBT students, the mission is to introduce you to these industries, connect you with sponsors, and a critical part of that is the resume. They were in good shape when we received them, but this webinar is really meant as a way to take them even one step further. It'll be an opportunity to further refine your resume before they're submitted for a final review. And as Rishi said, this is intended for students for the O4U Business Conference, but there may be insights here that you can glean for the other 4 as well. And so anybody is welcome to use this as they like. As stated in the email you received, this workshop is part of a 2-part series. What we're kicking off tonight, the webinar resume and guide, what we're currently doing, where you're going to hear us talk about how we can approach these resumes and provide our insights and tips, followed by individualized feedback. Those are both optional, but regardless of your participation in this workshop, all students must submit their final resume by the deadline of July 23rd. And you'll get more communication from us before that date, but just keep in mind that this workshop is optional. The final submission deadline is not. Now, before we get into the details, here's what we'll be covering today. We'll first learn how to, before we learn how to write the resume, we'll start a little more with kind of clearly understanding its purpose and how it will be used by employers. Move into the foundation and kind of the structure of how to build a resume, followed by the content that can fill into each section and the different ways to organize it. And then really the meat of this, where we'd like to spend the bulk of our time focused on not just the content, but how to write it and communicate it for maximum effectiveness. Now, all 3 of these are critical: the structure, content, and writing style. And we're covering all of them for comprehensiveness, as they're all essential. But they're not necessarily all as easy to execute. In my opinion, structure, format, content, those are a little more simple to get in place. A bit more of the table stakes, but the writing style can be a little more of a challenge and takes some practice. And that's where we'd like to spend the bulk of our time today. And finally, tying up some loose ends with finishing tips, followed by Q&A at the end. As Rishi said, please submit your questions throughout. We'll monitor those as they come in, and then we will answer them all and have an open guide at the very end for anything about the webinar or more broadly about the conference. So we can begin with the resume purpose. And the purpose of the resume is fairly straightforward and common knowledge. It's really about learning an applicant's skills and qualifications for the role. But it's important to consider and kind of ground ourselves before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to write the resume, to really think about how the employers will be using it and how everything in the resume should point back to that purpose. Employers screen resumes in a short amount of time, meaning that it's critical to demonstrate your impact and qualifications for the role in the most clear and concise way possible. This includes everything from how you write it to how you format it to the most important details. Really, anything that differs from that or differs from the norm may be distracting and may take away from your ability to really communicate your core impact in the ways that you're qualified for the role. And finally, it should be obvious, but this may serve as the basis for your interview. Really, anything that you put on your resume will be fair game and questions, and may create interest from your employer. And so it'll be something that you'll want to speak to and really cover what you want to shine and discuss in greater detail in the interview. And we're really starting with this just to cover and enforce the idea of beginning with the end in mind. All resumes should be tailored for the specific job or purpose that you plan to use it for. In this case, a resume tailored for the O4U Business Conference, and really ensuring that it meets up with the audience and the way it will be used. Next, we can move into the foundational aspect of the resume structure format, really how we can organize it in a way to communicate your qualifications. And this is a fairly standard approach that you see here, how to group together your qualifications. On the right, we have an illustrative example. Now, you don't have to follow that precisely, but this is an example of what to include and one of the ways that you could approach it. And as we'd hoped to convey, this is a webinar that's meant to provide our pointers and tips. We hope you use your own judgment as you apply them throughout. It's more applicable for the O4U Business Conference and this purpose as well. But given your situation, there may be some things that you want to do separately. And so that's just a general rule of thumb to follow throughout, including this structure that we see here to the right. Now, I won't read through this full list of items on the left, such as the font, the margin, but as a general rule of thumb, these are industry standards, and we recommend that you follow them because, as I mentioned before, it's really important that your resume is not overly formatted, because anything beyond a basic layout is a little distracting and may be difficult to read. The main message is don't be a designer. It's best to keep it simple. To the right, we see a series of categories: contact information, education, work experience, etc., which is where we'll be going next, looking at beyond the structure and really focusing on what content should be included in the resume. I'm not really talking about how to write it or how to craft it quite yet, but just the elements of what you'll be filling in into those categories. So starting at the top with contact information. This section is fairly clear and straightforward. Nobody really needs help here. As will be the next sections, as I mentioned, before we really get into the meat, just kind of laying the foundation. The main thing here to reinforce is it sets the tone for professionalism in all areas of the resume. Little details such as the email address or the voicemail, always critical to focus on the little areas that really reinforce who will be reviewing this and the professionalism that you convey. Next, moving on into education. This section really is just your opportunity to highlight your educational experience. It may vary for you based off of your program or your school, but it includes the most basic aspects such as the university, your major or minor, other details such as an honors program, a thesis, really anything else here that's relevant to your school and may stand out as a way to further distinguish you as a student. What you see here is an illustrative example of what to include, but as I said, it may vary based off of your program. And one point to remember that we oftentimes see is remember that the screener may not be familiar with your school, so really don't use acronyms here, even if it's common language for you. For example, I attended the undergrad McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University, MSB, and one of my majors was Operations in Information Management, OPM. While that would make sense to anybody at the school, always spell out things fully, whether it's here or a group that you're in at a company, just to ensure that whoever's reading it really understands what you're trying to convey. Otherwise, it may just be meaningless. And finally, one other comment for education is we recommend that you don't include your high school. In this setting, it's really not appropriate anymore. Your college experience will be more of interest to the employers. It's much more recent, what you're currently doing, and that's really what we recommend you highlight. Now moving on to the next section for resume content, work experience. Now, the key word here is relevancy. This is not an exhaustive list of your work experience, but your relevant work experience. This section is meant to reinforce that each and every resume, as you said, should be tailored for the specific job or the specific purpose that you're going to be using it. In this case, it's most important to focus on what's relevant and will really assist in demonstrating your impact and showing your qualification for the role that you're applying for. If you do have experience that does not really relate to that job, then you may just not want to reevaluate why you're including it at all. Or if you do decide to include it, really focus on the strengths that are particular or transferable to that role in a way that shows how it's relevant. The other information you see here, such as company, group, title, dates, and location, fairly straightforward. As with education, once again, we recommend that you leave off any high school work experience positions. If you're a first-year student, then there may be some room to do this just because you may not have enough really to talk about and it's a more recent experience. But in general, as I mentioned, employers will be a little more interested in your most relevant work experience during college that relates to what you're applying for. And it's a general rule of thumb. In this setting, we recommend that you focus in that area. One thing that we will talk about a little bit later on is many of you are kind of midstream in your internships right now. You'll want to talk about the great work you're doing and how it relates to O4U and kind of represent some of the accomplishments you've had recently. It might be a little bit of a challenge because you haven't quite finished it. And so at the end, we'll talk a little bit about, given that the final submission date is July 23rd, you won't have wrapped up your resume, what may be best to do in that situation.
Brian, do you mind if I add something?
Yep.
Two things here. In your work experience, one's a formatting thing and one is a content identifier. The first one around content, under work experience, if you're involved in a student organization that has some type of work-related activity. So the example that I commonly see is for those finance majors who are involved in their students, their university's hedge fund. So I know a lot of universities are starting to have their own hedge fund where you actively actually manage money. It is okay to have that as part of work experience. I would change this title to relevant experience, but it is an opportunity for you to shine as well. So that is okay to strive a little bit away from the rigid work experience area if it's really relevant to the role, for example, investment banking or sales and trading, if you're heavily involved in those types of hedge fund during school activities. The second piece is, it's a little formatting thing. We'll get to formatting a little later, but notice how in this example, Fairbanks Consulting and then Los Angeles, the formatting is very consistent. Sometimes recruiters can get lost to understand, okay, where are you, or where was that experience located, or during what dates? So consistent formatting on the same line is very important. It helps the reader or the recruiter understand and follow along quickly so they can check for the main checks that they're looking for within that 10, 30 seconds that they're looking in your resume. Okay? Those are my 2 points.
Great. Thanks, Rishi.
Oh, Dawn here. I'd also like to add one other point. This is going back to the previous section on education. I would do a little bit of investigation depending on the industry that you're interested in. Some industries will be interested in your SAT or ACT scores, so you may want to consider putting a section for that underneath.
Great. Well, if there's nothing else for education or work experience, the next category for content would be leadership and activities. And this is really anything beyond work experience or that relevant work experience that Rishi discussed that demonstrates your ability and impact in other ways. That may include school activities, volunteer, or any number of organizations that you may participate in. And again, it should be relevant and demonstrate your impact, but in a section like this, it may tie a little bit less directly to the role, but still demonstrate important qualities. For example, this is a good area where you can speak to leadership experience. At this level in your career, you may not have had, through your own work experience, the opportunity to demonstrate leadership and roles where you've kind of taken a leader standpoint. And so this is one of those areas where if you weren't able to demonstrate that in your work experience, leadership and activities or other forms of community involvement is a great way to highlight that. And as with experience and what Rishi said, follow the identical formatting structure for organization, role, dates, location. There's no reason that that should be different from work experience. Consistency in formatting and everywhere is a must-have. And this is one example, whether it's work experience, education, leadership, all of those have critical items such as the organization, a location, a date, a role. That should be consistent, even though they may be in different sections. And as with those other areas, again, we do recommend that you leave off your high school experience unless you are a first-year student. Once again, really just focusing on what are your most recent impacts and what might that employer be the most after. Likely that's going to be a little more involved in more recent things that you've done in college or through experiences that you've had in kind of college organizations. And then the last section for content is kind of this other category. What we show here as an example is skills and awards. And it's really a great place to include other information that may be skills and awards. It may be languages you're fluent in, honors you've received, or even interests. As you see here, there's kind of a reference to soccer and past involvement. May not directly be related to investment banking, but still an area that some people would like to include in their resume. You know, as I said, it may be relevant to the role or it may not entirely be relevant, but you do have some flexibility here that you would like to, that you can use. Now, if it's a common or expected skill, such as Microsoft Word, then it's not necessary to include. That's really just table stakes and something everybody should be able to do. However, if it is a skill that is less common or highly valued, be sure to include it, such as a computer programming language. And finally, avoid objectives. It's a little bit of an outdated element for the resume. It may be relevant elsewhere, but in this example, we recommend that you don't include that. And the same goes for references. It's not necessary to include individual names with contact information or lines such as references available upon request. Those aren't needed in this location. So that covers the really structure and format, and then the content that you can use to fill that in. And as I mentioned, those should be a little more clear and straightforward because they're really the foundational must-haves and frankly, a little easier to do. Hitting any of those marks are expected. Where you'll really stand out is how you write about your experience and convey that impact. And that's not easy to do. It's certainly not as easy as formatting or determining what content to include or exclude. It takes some time and practice, and conveying yourself in just a few bullet points isn't always easy, but that's what we're focusing here on, kind of the greater meat of the resume, where a lot of the review and incorporation of the pointers that we're sharing here, we hope to include. Now for format, part of this is really focusing on stripping away the extras, making it clear and consistent. One of the most common ways to do that is bullet points. A common recommendation that some people choose to use is also formatting in a table. One of the things that you'll see here, you'll all receive a PDF version of this afterwards. And it includes a hyperlink out to a way to do that. It's a great way to maintain that consistency, and it's fairly simple to do. Now, focusing on the style, there is a writing style for a resume, just like anything else that's written. Now, that writing style is meant to make it clear, concise, and easy to read. Please use simple language. This is not an area to pull out the thesaurus or try to jazz it up in a particular way. Another common element is to begin each sentence with an action verb, such as completed, analyzed, enhanced, increased, or developed. Those words convey something you've accomplished and demonstrate an impact that you've made. But also avoid repetition. Don't repeat the action verbs because if they're used too much, then they start to lose their meaning. Another critical stylistic element is to always maintain consistent tense. Present tense for current positions, past tense for previous positions. And ensure that when you make updates to a role or leave a role, always change the tense as well as the dates. If you went from being presently in a role to it ending in June 2017, don't just change the dates. You should always be updating that experience, but make sure you go back and also put it in the past tense because it's been completed. Overall, a common theme, the main takeaway is to be consistent, both in format, what we're talking about above, and the style. And as always, there's different options for how you can approach this. People may have their own preference, and that's perfectly fine. But whatever it is, the main thing is just to be consistent and use it throughout. Now, moving along into this drafting tip section, we're moving a little away from style and getting a bit more into how to describe your experience. As you've heard me say throughout, it's really about the impact that you've made. It's not simply stating a job description or a particular group or team or what your manager did, but your individual impact and your individual accomplishment. One of the best ways to do that is to quantify it. Represent your impact not just through a description, but really putting some context and quantifying it when possible. Another theme here that you've heard me repeat is to make it understandable, clear, and concise. That really means avoiding industry jargon or wordy explanations. Now, there may be areas where if it's a technical resume, for example, or something where you know that that's sought after and going to help your chances, then you may want to be a little more technical. But in general, avoiding industry jargon, because when an employer is skimming over your resume, if they don't understand it, then it'll not be easy to read and it may just be a meaningless explanation. And finally, always tell the truth. As I said when we first began, a resume is fair game in an interview, and you should expect questions to come off of what you're writing here. Everything you write should be truthful and accurate, so just ensure that whatever you are conveying isn't exaggerated or a deviation from the truth about your impact. They can all be very easily verified, and it's just best not to get into that area. Rishi,
Hey,
do you have anything you wanted to add before we talk about the STAR method?
Yes, so I would actually like to analyze those bullets and see how we can improve them a little more. So let's take the first one. Conduct a data transformation, analysis, and execution of a pricing and profitability improvement project for a Fortune 500 automotive company and found opportunities to increase net income by 4 to 5% with a project team of 8. What I like about this bullet is it's giving me information on, wow, this person was helping a Fortune 500 company, who's an automotive company, increase their net income by a certain number. It was quantifiable. What I would improve about this sentence or this bullet is just the grammar. Conducted data transformation, analysis, and execution. It's not parallel of a pricing profitability improvement project. How could you conduct data transformation of a pricing profitability improvement project? It doesn't make sense. So I would update this to be a little more grammatically correct. But what is great about this bullet is that it is quantifiable and it shows to a recruiter, oh, net income by 4 to 5%. That's actually hard to do. That is very interesting. And a interviewer may ask you about that question.
Yeah, I agree with Rishi. I think it's pulling out good points. And one thing I do want to highlight is that it's really important to use the same verb tense throughout. So that's kind of what Rishi meant by parallel. So in all of these jobs that you will be applying for, things like being very detail-oriented and paying very good attention to detail and making sure grammar is consistent throughout are incredibly, incredibly important. And having any kind of sloppiness or inconsistency there shows that your resume is kind of being haphazardly updated, not being written as a cohesive piece of writing. So I would just make sure that anytime you write a description or experience, you read through the entire thing and say, does this make sense as a paragraph? Does it sound like I'm talking about the same event in the same point in time?
Good call out. So let's go to the next one. And I feel deep diving on these is the most impactful part of this webinar. So that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. The next one, performed product velocity analysis, customer velocity analysis, price band analysis, so many analyses to determine pricing improvement opportunities and tested the impact of profitability. All right, so this bullet obviously does convey that you conducted a lot of analyses, but I'm not getting the impact or the result of that analysis, right? Yeah, they found improvement opportunities, but I'm not quantifying anything. The second is that it seems that it's just a listing of different things that you did. And while that's great, I think you could adjust it to first focus on what was the situation at hand? What were you analyzing? What did you do to analyze it at a high level? And then what did that analysis produce or result in for that client or that company that you're interning? I think it was an internship. Yep, that you're interning for. So that's how I would improve this. It has great content in terms of like, wow, pretty depth, but the lasting result on the reviewer does not come across to, wow, this person conducted something and resulted in some quantifiable impact. So that's what I would do to improve that. Dawn, do you have any other improvement suggestions?
I would say I would like to just kind of emphasize the redundancy piece that Rishi brought up. To me, if you look at price band analysis and price volume analysis, doing those two things probably takes the same set of skills, right? You'd probably use the same actions to accomplish those things. It's just kind of listing to me all of the things that you did. So what's more important to me here is, well, how large was the data set? What kind of conclusions were you able to gather from it? What kind of second order thinking did you use to make recommendations as to what further analysis needed to be done by future teams or your employees? Or your coworkers. So I would say that instead of listing all the different things that you calculated, think through what were the steps that I took and what were the skills that I used to calculate them. Because from looking at this list, it looks like this person did this all within the same program.
That's right. Okay, and I'll move on to the last one. This has a lot of numbers and some cool skills, so let's read it. Compiled 5 million transactions in Microsoft Access and used SQL to apply attributes, calculations, allocations, and adjustments into 122 fields to get data ready for analysis. So my analysis of this bullet, great, like it gave me the impact of how many transactions you analyzed. It gave me the skills you used to do some data transformation, and it showed me the breadth of it. But I'm missing the so what. And I want to get to the next section, you'll understand what I mean by the so what. But basically, like, congrats, we did this analysis, but what did this enable? What impact did this action that you took have on the intended audience? And that's what's missing to me. So it's not completing the full picture. It's almost like a run-on sentence to me. And Dawn,
yeah,
do you have
I
a second?
agree. I think it was. Yeah, I agree. I think if it was followed up with a second bullet saying, and by the way, this data was used for these purposes. I do think it is fine to like show the set of skills that you did, show that you were working with a piece of data of this size. Like, I think that's all good, but there needs to be some kind of follow up as to what the purpose of it is. So, I mean, I would look at this and wonder if maybe the third bullet should have gone before the second bullet, because I'm wondering if the items, all of this analysis from the second bullet is the output from the SQL work.
Exactly. And I would actually recommend to whoever wrote this to find a way if they could combine number 2 and number 3. It seems like they were both the same, that you did some data cleansing, or maybe just do some reordering because of line space, but did some data cleansing, and then you did some analysis, which then resulted in X impact. And that would complete the story to me.
Yeah, I think
so that's a good suggestion, Dawn.
Story. I can think through an example from my background. I remember I used a research assistant job I had with a law professor. And the story that I told in my resume was, hey, I was given all this raw data. I was given all of these historical documents. By looking through these historical documents, I read X number of interviews, pulled these number of insights for her, and then in the end, I produced this output. So look at the bullets and think that if someone has no familiarity with what your role was, they should be able to read the bullets in order and slowly unpeel the layers of everything that you accomplished throughout the summer.
So that's our analysis of this. There's a lot of improvement opportunities. And for you all, we went through this exercise on purpose because you get to understand a glimpse of what the other side, or the recruiter, the analysts who are reviewing the resumes, they can get pretty deep, and they can say, oh, like I'm missing the story. And then that could lead to, oh, I need to follow up, or I need to spend more time. It doesn't convey a clear story, and typically conveying a clear story with your impact can remove that that uneasiness from the other side. So hopefully that gives you a glimpse into what the other side, or what the other side, by meaning the recruiters and the companies, are really looking at and analyzing. So just wanted to provide you that glimpse into how people look at resumes. Brian, back to you.
Great. Well, and I think it's great that we first kind of did that analysis and then jump into the last thing we're going to discuss for drafting techniques is the STAR method, which really provides a framework to think about that example that we provided and really deconstruct it and say, does everything in this bullet or series of bullets, if it's kind of telling parts of a story, as Don mentioned, really provide a little more of a cohesive story? Here in the STAR technique, it's a common approach to behavioral interviews to really much more fully set the stage and explain the task at hand and demonstrate your results. It's about surveying everything related to that experience, starting with a situation, really providing a concrete example, oftentimes a challenge that you overcame. The task, identifying the needed resolution, the action, how you responded, the skills you applied, as Rishi was talking about in terms of kind of the different analyses that were used, and was that more of the outcome of what you were doing? And then finally, the results. What was the outcome? How did you measure the success? And as we discussed before, one of the ways is, can you quantify that outcome by discussing it in the results, or even making it much more clear by including, quantifying the situation? What was it that you started with? How do you quantify the result and demonstrate a connection there? And this is a really great approach to think about how you're crafting each bullet and writing about whether it's a work experience or a leadership opportunity or anything really across the resume. And it's also a great way to highlight specific accomplishments instead of just speaking very generally every time. An employer may not really understand some of that more general language that you're referring to. And the STAR method is a great way to really reinforce discussing a specific task at hand and demonstrate your thought process and the resolution of that specific task. And at the end of the day, it really just helps to make the goal that you were working towards a little more clear, and also demonstrate your ability to understand the challenge at play. As it says on the bottom, if you really apply this method to each bullet or a series of bullets, then it's a great way to kind of evaluate what you've written and say, is it conveying what I wanted to? Can the person who's reading this resume understand everything here? And if not, what more do I need to add and what's missing?
I think this method is one of the best frameworks out there. And the STAR technique is typically used, as Brian was mentioning, in a interview setting, but applying that to your resume and understanding, would the reader understand my impact? It's the best framework to use. One thing I will caution is sometimes situation and task in resume writing can blur. That's okay. You don't have to have a defined situation, defined task. It's more of a framework. But just overall understand that setting context is so important to orient your reader, so then you can really describe the actions, the tasks, and the results of those. So I just wanted to highlight that when I work with students, they struggle with situation and task. I find that there is a blurred line between them, and that's okay. Great.
Well, and that's a lot of content that we just threw at you. The foundational aspect of structure and format, what should be filled in there, and then not just what that is, but how to write it. And And I think everybody, Terry, Rishi, Don, and I, who sees a lot of resumes, would say all of that is critical. But at the end of the day, one of the most important and basic tips is to thoroughly review your resume for any kind of mistake, as simple as grammar, formatting, spelling, inconsistent tense. Really go line by line to ensure that there are no loose ends. Both you and a trusted partner should read it. That may be a friend, a parent, really anybody who can provide honest feedback. And don't just rely on your computer screen. There will always be mistakes that you catch when you print it out, both as a Word doc and also a PDF, to make sure that when you convert it, the formatting and everything stays as you expect. And finally, when it comes time to submit your resume and you've ensured that everything is in place, help out the reviewer and also maintain professionalism by submitting it in a PDF and with a name that is helpful and indicates that it's yours. So that really covers the content and what we're hoping to discuss for the resume workshop itself. Really, as I mentioned, starting from the bottoms up, the foundation, moving on to the content, and then finishing with how to write about it. And also not just how to write it, but also how to kind of, all of you have resumes in place. We don't necessarily expect that you're going to start from scratch, but if you incorporate these slides, look at them and say, well, how well does my current resume that I applied with for O4U match up with that? That's probably the best takeaway you could take from here, including the framework, such as the STAR method. We hope that you found this helpful and to highlight those areas of your resume where these suggestions can be incorporated. As I said, overall, many of the students provided good resumes, but there always is room for improvement. If you would like to submit your resume for individualized review, then please do follow that suggestion to review this in detail, incorporate those suggestions, and then submit it for review no later than our deadline of Sunday, July 9th. We'll be providing a link via email for you to upload the resume. And then we promise that we'll get you those resume feedbacks in time so that you can meet the deadline, which is required for everybody, regardless of your participation in the workshop, to submit the resume for sponsors by July 23rd. Now, one of the things I did say we'll discuss at the end is a lot of these students are in the midst of their interviews, in the midst of their internships. So in Q&A, maybe we can also discuss a little bit about how do you talk about something that hasn't been completely wrapped up. And hopefully we got some great questions in the process. Rishi, do you want to start that off?
Certainly. So there are a lot of questions that came in. If you have any other questions, feel free to leverage the live chat window on YouTube Live. So why don't we start with this one? And this is a formatting question. So a student asked, is it okay to spice up your resume with my own formatting? I have a personal logo and that has the same font as the resume headers, such as education, but is it okay to spice up your resume with my own formatting, my own personal logo?
Dawn here. I would have to say no, unless it's quite subtle. I guess if you have a logo and you really like to put it next to your name, that would be fine if it's not distracting. But I find when I see colored bars and white text on top of a colored backdrop and different font colors and sizes and all of that stuff, it's just really distracting. And ultimately, when you're reviewing resumes, these types of formatting things don't really make your resume stick out in the professional services, financial services, management consulting industry. It just makes it harder for us to get to the point and understand what you accomplished. I think there are a lot of creative fields like marketing and advertising where I could see this being an advantage and showing that you know how to package yourself. But I would say that in the management consulting industry in particular, it's more difficult for me to speak to the others. We're really just looking to understand the type of thinking that you were using in college, your qualitatively and quantitatively, what you've accomplished, and what kind of leader you are interpersonally.
Great answer. So the next question is, how can I be out on the resume?
Hey, I'd be happy to take this one too. Dawn here again. So I think there's a few ways to go about doing that. So one obvious way to go about doing that is if you're involved in an LGBTQ organization on campus, you can list that involvement in that leadership activity. Another thing you can do, especially now that you're about to attend this conference, is some folks will list conferences or case competitions they've participated in. So you could list this as a conference that you attended, or list this as something that you're involved in. And finally, I know some people include an interest section at the bottom. So you might include, if say you're interested in LGBTQ activism, or you're interested in issues related to along those lines, that could be something that you could add at the bottom as an interest of yours, along with other things to spice up your resume.
Great. I'll take the next two questions. So the first question is related to what Dawn mentioned. And I think a student asked, is it ever appropriate to put on the conferences we represented at our schools, such as this one, or leadership conferences? So I think conferences are a great way to show your involvement in various areas of your life. So for example, this conference is a perfect way. If you would like to show that you're out on your resume, etc., I would, if you are more of an attendee or a participant, I'd recommend thinking about putting that more in the bottom section, where the skills and interests section, instead of a leadership experience specifically, given that you're tending to learn. So unless you had a specific impact, like maybe a campus ambassador or something else, then put it up in the leadership/work experience areas. But I would encourage you to think about, is it best served to be in that bottom portion? That's what I recommend for how to address conferences and attendance to conferences in your resume. I'm going to go to the next question. And this is a question that I'm extremely passionate about. And I hear this from students all the time. I'm not a VP or a president of an organization. How do I stand out? And I know a lot of us have different opinions on this question. It may be similar, but from my perspective, being president or vice president of an organization doesn't automatically show that you have leadership, right? When I'm doing reviews of candidates, my goal is to understand the actions, as Don was mentioning, how you think, what's your quantitative skills, your qualitative skills. What are the actions you took and what did it result in? What was the impact you had in an organization? So for example, being a chair of an organization is perfectly fine as long as you're showing demonstrable impact. So an example could be if you're the recruiting chair for your organization. You implemented 4 or 5 various promos that resulted in a 60% increase in your membership base from 100 people to 160 people, etc. That bullet probably could use a little more refinement, since I just wrote it and said it out loud. But you can understand that this person took a clear action to drive a result. The VP and president, they're just titles, and I'd rather take somebody who did the work, made an impact, over somebody who just had the title and didn't really demonstrate any value or impact. So that would be my advice. Is obviously strive for president, strive for vice president. It's amazing opportunities, but when you're younger, you're freshman, sophomore, first year, sophomore, etc. Focus on the impact you have. And that's the advice I would give to you. Dawn, do you have a perspective?
I'd say that about covers it, honestly.
Cool. All right. The next one. For first-year students, is it okay to blend a small amount of your high school accolades, such as being valedictorian of your high school? Brian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think the key here is for first-year students. I think that at that point, it's clear from your dates on your school, if your expected graduation is 4 years away, that you're going to rely on some of that. And it's fairly recent if you're a first year. But I think the question is, as time goes on, you will want to replace that. That's how I approached it. Like Rishi said, this I think is another area where a lot of people have different opinions on it. But first year, I would say yes. Beyond that, it depends. You know, it really shouldn't be something that at some point you think you can rely on forever. And it's also one of the things we didn't mention is this is a must-have one-pager, limited resources, and a lot of these decisions will be that it's not about including everything that may make you look great, but including a few things where you can really demonstrate that great ability. And if that's one of those things, then that's just a decision kind of early in college that you may want to make.
Yeah, Dawn here. I'd have to agree. I would say that when I was applying for internships, you know, my freshman year, I didn't really have any leadership positions yet on campus. So there wasn't really anything for me to include in that sense. But, you know, I remember I put that I was the editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper. And I'm sure that that wasn't too helpful to the internships that I was applying to, but they also knew that I was a freshman. By the time I was a sophomore and I was applying for internships, I was, you know, very careful to not really include any activities from high school because relevant anymore. I think the more you're immersed in college and you think about the depth of your involvement in organizations and activities and academics in college, I guess I would encourage you to think back to the work that you did in high school and think if that would be the work that you would want to show to your employers, right? And I would say that if you are a first year and you're blending collegiate and secondary school activities, just be really clear to delineate which is which. So don't just put editor of newspaper. Make it clear that it was the editor of your high school newspaper and not your college newspaper. So some kind of clear delineation is important, especially if you're blending the two as a first-year student.
Great. I'm going to go a little rapid fire so that we can get to the last main question, which is how can we address summer internship on your resume if it won't be wrapped up by the due date? So there are some questions that are quick rapid fire. The first one is, and I'll take these quickly, is there a downside to combining work and leadership? For me, I believe work and leadership, if it's all relevant experience, that's okay. But I would encourage you to think about breaking up the resume to show your relevant experiences up top and then your other leadership activities. When you're thinking about your involvement, a diversity involvement is a good thing in university. So not only focusing on the professional organizations, but maybe some of the fun things or giving back, nonprofit, etc. It is a good way to break up your resume and show your impact and your interests in other places. The next one is it okay if I'm applying for full-time to put experience before education? This was actually by a student named Kyle who said, hi, Rishi, so hi back. So full-time experience before education. Given that you're under the university recruitment lens, I'd still recommend just keeping education at the top because all the recruiters are actually used to seeing education at the top. When you go to the full-time, when you go back to, when you're doing experience hire recruiting, that might change. But you're still going through university recruitment, they still want to see that education up top, particularly because they want to see your major and your GPA before they go down to your experience. So recommend just remove the awkwardness, keep it education at top. Next one, is it okay to say that I attended a, let me actually reread this, 1 second. Is it okay that I attended I attended an investment management undergrad camp in a bank if I'm applying to the consulting/investment banking? This one's a tricky one, and this is primarily due to, what impact can you show or what did you get out of that experience? So if it has no relatable experience whatsoever, and you have enough content to fill your resume showing that you're involved and you have an impact and you can think and you're interested, etc., would recommend not including it. However, if it does add value to your resume, it would be something that I would recommend you think about putting it in. Just make sure you craft it in a way that could be appeasing to the industry that you're applying to.
Yeah, and one other quick note here. I would say that if you're coming from a more non-traditional background, so if you are getting a liberal arts degree or an engineering degree, it might be worth including something like that briefly on the resume just to show that you are expressing an interest in business.
Hey, this is Terry. So I think that if you are applying to banking and you have an investment management camp in a bank, I think you take a whole section. It could be one of those like conferences, and especially if it's at like a bulge bracket firm or something, that'll be really helpful to your resume.
So Terry, I think you cut out in and out due to your reception, but to recap, I think you were mentioning that for investment banks, any role there, having that experience could round out your experience and be beneficial to you. So thanks for providing the perspective, Terry, from a financial services perspective. All right, some more questions came in, but why don't we address the main question that I think a lot of students are wondering is, how can I address my summer internship on my resume if it's due before when my internship is wrapped up? So Brian, do you have a perspective on that? I have a perspective.
I think I'll let you lead that one, Rishi.
Okay, no worries. So yes, we do require the resume be submitted end of July, given that we have to turn these around to the recruiters. So what can you do, or what can you understand or think about before crafting that resume? A couple things you want to think about. First one is you are likely a couple weeks into your internship, and you have likely already completed some significant tasks, actions to make an impact on your current internship. So I would take a look back within your couple of weeks and analyze what are some of the activities that I did, what resulted in the bigger picture of what I'm helping either in a consulting firm, my client, or in a financial services firm, client/project. What am I doing to impact the bigger picture? So I would spend some time in introspection, thinking about the impact you've been making, and try to quantify everything you've done to that date that's impactful. And that should give enough content. If you are struggling for content, then I would wait a little bit, right, probably a week before the deadline, and try to get some more impactful experiences before then and incorporate it into your resume. I would caution you against being forward-looking or future-looking, saying that you will get that impact and position it as if you've already done it. So for example, if you think that you're going to be able to present in front of a client, present recommendations in front of the CEO, and then and that would result in the CEO buying more consulting services for the firm, et cetera, and you think that's going to happen in the future, I would recommend not putting that on your resume, because you never know. The CEO could change his schedule, his or her schedule, and say, okay, I can't meet and your internship is over. And then it'd be disingenuous. So I'd focus on the impact that you've had and the impact that you're going to have before the deadline, and really put that in there. Dawn, do you have any more perspectives?
Yeah, I would say that you should still try to pull one or two numbers. I think there's a balance of ways to be kind of forward thinking without, tagging to specific events. Like, I think that if I'm trying to think of a good example for this, but I think there is a way to look at the trajectory that your summer is going in and think like, okay, so I did a brief 2-week project. It appears that this internship program is structured that you do a 2-week project every X number of weeks. So you could say like, oh, I completed approximately a dozen projects, right? Like you could to like see, going and project outward. But yes, I would agree with Rishi. Don't flag to a specific event or a specific outcome that you're counting on, but think through what is the trajectory of this internship and how can I sort of explain how it's going. If I were to explain to someone what I think by the end now in a way that I can guarantee it, I would, balance it in that way.
So I want to give you a specific example and actually use this. If let's say you were on, and this is for consulting example, and I'll give a financial services example I can think of. Let's say you're on a project, and the project run rate, which is just a projection of what the project will save. Let's say you're helping a company deliver a project that is expected to grow the company's revenue by 2% within 5 years, right? And that's actually pretty big. What you could do in that scenario is write out the tasks that you did and then position it as you completed X tasks which resulted in X in hopes or with an expected outcome of generating 2% sales growth, right? So like your statement of work, which you can ask your project partner or your manager, what is the work that I'm doing? What is the bigger picture? And you can connect the activities you've done so far to that bigger picture, highlighting, saying expected, to highlight to the recruiter saying that, I was doing this activity and the run rate or the expectation was that it's going to save the client X million dollars or grow their revenue. So that's a way to kind of draw the fine line between expectations and what's been the run rate of projects versus kind of like expecting something's going to happen and not it actually happening.
Yeah, I really like that, Rishi. That's a great example.
Mm-hmm. And in financial services, same thing. If you're working on an M&A deal, merger and acquisition deal, you could write, I don't think you can make that public, so you can say merger between two Fortune 500 automotive companies and did XYZ activities enabling the companies to merge better or faster, or find a metric that that you're contributing to that's expected and that's doable in the financial services sector. Okay. All right. I know this was supposed to be an hour, but I'm going to override that and say that there's more questions, so I'm happy to answer them a little bit. There's about 3 more, so we'll answer those so we can get them in. The next question is, if we had really relevant experience in high school that corresponds to a potential career path, why would we omit it? Why is that looked down upon? I think I can take a first crack at that, and if anybody else has a perspective. So I hear you, right? Like our high school days, a lot of you are amazing leaders, and that transcended into your accomplishments in college. The reason why, from our perspective, it's looked down upon, and if just quick disclaimer, if you feel that this is a value add to the impact that you can show to recruiters, by all means include it. But I would question you to think about, could I use that experience and apply it to something currently in university to show that continuity? To show that maybe I had a business or asset management business when I was younger, helping my parents or a friend or colleague to run that business, and that's relatable. Could you do some activities or be involved in university that would continue that experience moving forward and still show that impact? You likely have that experience. You could leverage that and really apply it. Otherwise, that's about what, 4 years? Like let's say you're a senior and you're applying for full time or a junior. That's 3 or 4 years kind of difference between when you had that impact and when you are applying. The recruiter is going to ask, then what happened, right? Why didn't you continue it? So that would be something I recommend you analyze. It's a personal decision. I would recommend finding a way to continue that in your university, and then it's more appropriate to include it. But by all means, if it's relatable, you think it's going to make you stand out, totally fine. It's a personal decision, but this is just my recommendation about moving forward. Okay.
Yeah, Dawn here.
Hey, this is.
Let's just say that you volunteered for a presidential campaign in high school, and you want to showcase that's an interest of yours. I would say that if you're a junior and you're applying for jobs and you haven't built on that volunteering experience in high school, I don't know how interesting it would be to recruiters that you were involved in something in high school if you haven't continued it to this day. So perhaps let's say that you use that opportunity to work for a nonprofit of someone from that campaign, right? In the bullet point, you could mention like, through previous volunteer experience on this presidential campaign. Like, I think there's ways to bring that uniqueness in. Now, certainly, if the most impressive thing that you did was this internship in high school, then may perhaps include it. But I think that what we're trying to get to is that you should really look at the experiences that you've had since high school as valuable, and the recruiters who are reviewing your resume likely will as well.
Terry, did you want to add something? I think you got cut off a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah. Hey, this is Terry. So I think, like everybody else mentioned, it's a case by case basis. But I actually, my own personal experience, I did put some of my high school stuff on when I was recruiting, because I worked in one of like the big four accounting firms when I was in high school, and I was recruiting for one of the big four accounting firms, and so that was very relevant experience, right? But I kind of tailor my resume specifically for those firms. So it might be one of those things where you might have like kind of like two resumes, which I guess in this scenario would not be the most ideal, because this resume will be going out to all the sponsors. But if you are applying to a specific program and you want them to look at that high school experience, then yeah, by all means put it down.
Great answers. And again, just want to underline, it's a personal decision. So analyze your own situation and see, would this make me stand out, given you can take our input into consideration. Next one, I think there's two more, and then we can wrap up. And as always, if there's any questions you all have, you have our emails. Feel free to respond or submit via the submission link that you'll get soon, and we can discuss those. The next one is, how would you put a foundation you're affiliated to on your resume? And for this one, I'll take quickly. If you're affiliated with the foundation and it's just involvement, I would use the conference example, where potentially putting it in your skills, awards, interests section. If it's a leadership position or you're doing an activity that's making an impact, put it under leadership. It's totally valid. It's something that you can do. The next one and the last one is, would you recommend including work experience? So like paid positions. Oh, okay. So like retail positions while you're at university. So for example, like you work at the Starbucks or something else, or a retail store, something that's just not just an internship, but more like a university job. I don't have a perspective on that. I think I've seen a lot of resumes. Go ahead, Don.
Oh yeah, Dawn here. I would say that you should probably include it, because it provides a little bit of color and context as to your life and experience. So if I look at a student who I see as the president of two clubs, is in a complex academic program, is getting good grades, and I see that they're also working, a part-time job and presumably supporting themselves financially, I find that to be very admirable, and it tells me a lot about the student and their character. So obviously don't include these kind of experiences to the detriment of internships, but I would say that if it provides context on you as a student, and you as to how you're able to balance things and how you're able to work hard. And I think employers really respect that increasingly.
I completely agree. Any other perspectives on that question?
No, I agree. I think, as Don said, there's limited space. If you're going to exclude something that's more relevant, such as an internship that you think is important, then by all means include the internship instead. But I think it does add color, and it does present a whole other set of skills, which are very valuable. And it should be mentioned if you'd like to display it.
Great. Let me just scan the last bit of comments, see if I missed any. No, I think we captured all of them. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. We hope that this is valuable to you. Brian, do you mind switching to the next step slide again?
Yep.
So as Brian mentioned, to participate in the resume workshop, we'll be sending out a link shortly after this webinar with the recording, the PDF version of this document, and the link to submit your resume for review. I would encourage you all to really take the feedback, take the learnings from this webinar into account, revise your resume before you submit so you can get the most impact from us to make your resume even better. And then, so that, again, that's optional. And then we will be sending something to you shortly after the 4th of July holidays with instructions on submitting your final resume for inclusion in the resume book that will be sent to our sponsors. Thank you so much. We are excited to meet you all in October and engage with you throughout the summer. Hope you have a great summer in your internships and whatever experiences you're having over the summer, and enjoy. So thank you everyone for joining, and that's the end of our webinar.